The sight that finally broke me wasn't the pile of my clothes on the wet grass, or my favorite armchair, the one my late husband Frank always sat in, carelessly shoved onto the curb like a piece of trash. No. The thing that shattered the last piece of my heart was the sight of my son, Kevin, standing in the doorway of my bedroom, directing his wife where to hang their pictures on the wall, as if I were already dead and buried. Hi everyone. I'm Grandma Margaret. My name is Margaret Gable. I'm 79 years old, and I'm speaking to you from the kitchen Frank and I designed together over 50 years ago, here in our little corner of Illinois. It's my kitchen again now. But for a very long time, it wasn't. This is a story I've kept locked away, a story so full of shame and humiliation that I couldn't even speak of it to my own sister. She knows there was an arrangement. She knows Kevin and his wife lived with me for a while. But she doesn't know the truth. She doesn't know about the slow creeping invasion. She doesn't know how my home stopped being my sanctuary and became my prison. And she certainly doesn't know that I, a woman who has never raised her voice in her life, am the one who stood in a lawyer's office and calmly, deliberately, sued her own son to take back the very roof over his head. It's a terrible thing to have to treat your own child like an enemy. It goes against every instinct a mother has. Sharing this feels like reopening a wound I've tried so hard to let scar over. But I have to. For anyone out there who has ever felt small in their own home, I have to tell you my story. Before I begin, would you do me a small kindness? Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Knowing that your hearts are with me, knowing that there are people who will listen without judgment, it gives me the strength to walk back through that fire one more time. Thank you. It means more than you know. My story truly begins not with anger, but with love, in the year 1970. That was the year my Frank finished building this house. He wasn't a professional builder. He was an accountant, a man of numbers and quiet precision. But he built this house for me with his own 2 hands, every single weekend for 2 years. I remember the smell of fresh cut wood and the constant layer of sawdust on his clothes. He'd come in at dusk, tired but with a light in his eyes, and show me his progress. He built the bay window in the living room because he knew I loved to watch the birds in the morning. He built the wide covered porch because he knew I loved to sit outside during a summer rainstorm. Every nail, every board, every window was a testament to his love. This house, it wasn't just wood and plaster. It was the physical shape of our life together. It was our fortress of love. Our life inside these walls was simple, but it was rich. It was a life of shared coffee in the morning, of gardening together in the afternoons, of reading side by side in the evenings. And in 1978, our quiet fortress was filled with a new kind of joy. Our son Kevin was born. Oh, that boy. He was my world. From the moment I held him, I knew a love so fierce it almost frightened me. He was a sweet, easygoing child. He had Frank's steady nature, but my softer heart. He was my shadow in the kitchen, always wanting to help stir the batter or sneak a piece of cookie dough. I can still see him, a little boy with a shock of blonde hair and scraped knees, learning to ride his bicycle in our driveway. Frank would be running alongside him, and I'd be watching from the porch, my heart so full I thought it might burst. We were a team, the 3 of us. This house was our haven, the place where we were safe, where we were loved. Kevin was a good son, a wonderful son. He never gave us a moment of trouble. He was kind, respectful, and loving. When he went off to college, he called me every single Sunday, without fail. He was the kind of son every mother dreams of. When my Frank passed away from a stroke 8 years ago, the light and laughter in this house went with him. The silence was a physical thing, a crushing weight. Kevin was my rock. He was in his 30s then, with a life of his own in the city, but he drove home every weekend. He'd mow the lawn, fix the leaky faucet, sit with me for hours while I cried. He was my lifeline. He was all I had left of Frank, and I clung to him. It was during this time, in my grief and loneliness, that I made the decision that would eventually become the weapon used against me. The house was paid off, my only real asset. A lawyer friend suggested that, to make things simpler when I eventually passed, I should add Kevin's name to the deed as a joint tenant. It seemed so sensible. It was an act of love, of trust. Kevin was my only child. Of course, the house would be his one day. I remember the day we signed the papers. Kevin held my hand. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'll always take care of you. You'll always have this house. This will always be your home, I promise." I believed him. I believed him with every fiber of my being. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. A couple of years later, he met Brenda. When he brought her home to meet me, I was so happy for him. She was dazzling. She had a high-powered job in marketing, wore beautiful clothes, and had a smile that could charm a bird right out of a tree. She was ambitious and sharp, a stark contrast to my gentle, easygoing son. I thought perhaps that she was just what he needed, someone to give him a little push in life. She was perfect to me at first. She called me Mom, complimented my home, and always brought a thoughtful little gift. She'd look at Kevin with such adoration. "You raised such a wonderful man, Margaret," she'd tell me. "He's so kind and grounded. It's because of you." Her words were like honey. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe that my son had found a woman who would cherish him. They got married in a lavish ceremony that I knew they couldn't afford. I gave them a substantial amount of my savings to help, which I was happy to do. But I saw the first flicker of something unsettling. Brenda's tastes were expensive. She spoke often about her friends' vacation homes, their new cars, their designer clothes. There was a hunger in her, a relentless desire for more that felt alien to the simple, contented life I had known. But Kevin seemed so happy, so in love, that I pushed my concerns away. I told myself I was just being a worried old mother, that I didn't understand their modern world. The beginning of the end started with a phone call. It was about 3 years ago. Kevin called me, his voice tight with a stress I had never heard before. "Mom, we're in a bit of a jam." He explained that Brenda had been laid off from her high-powered job, a fact she had been hiding for months. They had been living on credit cards, trying to keep up appearances, and now they were drowning in debt. They were about to be evicted from their expensive city apartment. Could we maybe stay with you for a little while?" he asked, his voice full of shame. "Just for a few months, just until Brenda finds something new and we can get back on our feet." What mother could say no? My heart broke for him. "Of course, sweetie," I said without a moment's hesitation. "This is your home. You can stay as long as you need." That was my mistake. I opened the door to my fortress, not just to my son in need, but to his wife's ambition. They moved in the following weekend. At first, it was wonderful. The house, which had been so silent and empty, was filled with life again. Brenda was a whirlwind of energy. She insisted on cooking dinner every night. "You've spent your whole life cooking for others, Mom," she'd say, shooing me out of my own kitchen. "It's time you let someone take care of you." Kevin would do the yard work, the heavy lifting. They were so grateful, so helpful. It felt like we were a family again. I had my son back under my roof. The loneliness that had been my constant companion since Frank's death began to recede. But a few months turned into 6, then a year. Brenda got a new job, but it wasn't as high-paying as her last one. They made no move to look for their own place. Instead, they began to settle in. Deeper. The first sign that something was truly wrong was subtle. Brenda started reorganizing the house. She called it decluttering. It began in the living room. "Margaret, there's just so much old stuff in here," she said one day, waving a hand at the collection of family photos on the mantelpiece. "It looks so dated. Let's create a cleaner look." Before I could protest, she had packed away most of my photos. Pictures of me and Frank, of Kevin as a baby, and replaced them with a single, large, professionally shot portrait from her wedding to Kevin. My history was being curated, edited, and put in a box in the attic. When I tried to object, she gave me a pitying look. "Oh, Mom, don't be sentimental." "We can't live in the past. This is so much more chic." She turned to Kevin. "Doesn't it look better, honey?" And Kevin, my sweet boy who hated conflict, just nodded. Really opens up the room. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was choosing her peace over my comfort. It was a small betrayal, but it was a crack in the foundation. Then, she moved on to the kitchen. My kitchen. She bought new, modern appliances with a credit card I later learned she'd opened in Kevin's name. She reorganized my cabinets, my pantry, until I couldn't find anything. "It's a better system, Mom," she'd say cheerfully. "Much more efficient." I felt like a guest in my own kitchen, fumbling around for a coffee cup while she moved with a brisk, proprietary air. I tried to talk to Kevin about it. I found him alone on the porch one evening. "Kevin," I began gently, "Brenda is changing things. This house is full of your father's memories. I don't want to lose that." He looked deeply uncomfortable. He sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Mom, please don't start. Brenda's just trying to help. She's making the house more modern, more livable. She works so hard. Can't you just try to appreciate it? Don't make things difficult. I don't make things difficult." The words were a slap. I was the one being asked to bend, to accommodate, to erase myself in my own home. I was being difficult for wanting to keep my memories, my life, intact. I was no longer the queen of my own castle. I was becoming the tolerated, slightly annoying old relative who lived in it. The real shift, the moment I knew this was a hostile takeover, happened in the guest room. That room had been Frank's office. His old desk was still there, his books on the shelves. It was a sacred space to me. I went in one afternoon to find Brenda on the phone with a painter. "Yes, a light gray," she was saying. "And we'll need the ceiling painted white. We want it to be a nursery." I froze in the doorway. "A nursery?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She hung up the phone and turned to me, a brilliant, excited smile on her face. "Oh, Mom, I was going to tell you tonight. Surprise! We're pregnant." Of course, I was happy. A grandchild? It was a dream come true. I hugged her. I hugged Kevin when he came home. But later that night, as the excitement wore off, a cold dread filled me. A nursery. In Frank's office. They weren't just staying for a few months anymore. They were putting down roots. They were building their life on top of mine, and they were expecting me to provide the foundation. The house, once my fortress, was beginning to feel like a cage. My own son, once my protector, was now the chief guard, and his wife was the warden. They weren't just sharing my home anymore. They were colonizing it, and I was the native inhabitant, being slowly, politely, pushed onto a smaller and smaller reservation. I had no idea how small that reservation was about to become. The news of a grandchild should have been the purest joy. And it was, for a moment. But that joy was quickly eclipsed by a creeping, suffocating dread. The word nursery echoed in my head. It wasn't just a room for a baby. It was a flag being planted. It was a declaration. This is our home now. Not yours. Brenda. The transformation of Frank's office was swift and brutal. I stood by, helpless, as Kevin and Brenda packed my husband's books into cardboard boxes. Each book that went into a box felt like a piece of his soul being stored away in the dark. His solid mahogany desk, the one he had used for 40 years, was dismantled and shoved into a corner of the damp basement. In its place, a white crib and a pastel-colored changing table appeared. I tried to save one thing: his old, worn leather desk chair. "Please," I begged Kevin, my hand on the smooth, cracked leather. "Let me just keep this in my room. Your father loved this chair." Brenda stepped between us, her smile tight and pitying. "Margaret, it's a lovely thought, but it's big and clunky, and it smells like old books. It won't match the new decor. Don't worry," she added, patting my arm in that condescending way she had perfected. "We'll find a nice, new, comfortable chair for you." She wasn't asking. She was telling. I looked at Kevin, my eyes pleading with him to intervene, to understand. He just looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "Brenda's right, Mom," he mumbled. "It's for the best." He wouldn't look at the chair. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't face the ghost of his father or the slow-motion betrayal of his mother. The chair went into the basement. With the baby on the way, Brenda's sense of entitlement swelled to an unbearable size. My home was no longer just a place to be redecorated. It was a territory to be conquered and secured for her new family. My role was further diminished. I was no longer even the tolerated old relative. I was a potential hazard. "Margaret, you can't leave your knitting needles on the side table," she would chide me, her voice sharp. "What if the baby gets a hold of them one day? Brenda, the baby isn't even born yet. It won't be crawling for almost a year after that. It's about establishing good habits," she'd snap back. "We need to start baby-proofing now." My life was being baby-proofed. My small comforts, my hobbies, were being packed away, deemed too dangerous for the future prince who would soon rule this house. The financial pressure mounted. Brenda was no longer working, and she spent money with a breathtaking carelessness. Expensive baby gear, designer maternity clothes, organic, everything. It all went on credit cards that I knew Kevin was struggling to pay. The polite fiction that they were getting back on their feet was abandoned. It was simply assumed that my pension, my social security, my savings would be absorbed into the general household fund, a fund to which I had no access and over which I had no control. Once, a letter came from the bank about a low balance in my savings account. Brenda, who now collected the mail every day as if she were the postmistress, opened it before I saw it. She confronted me in the living room, waving the letter like a weapon. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice dripping with accusation. "The savings are almost gone. What have you been spending money on?" I was speechless. What have we been spending money on? "Brenda, I haven't bought anything for myself in months. You're the one buying new furniture, new clothes." "I am buying things for your grandchild," she retorted, placing a protective hand on her swelling belly. It was her trump card, and she used it constantly. "Everything I do is to build a beautiful home for this baby. I thought you'd be happy to contribute. I guess I was wrong. I guess you don't care about your own grandchild's comfort?" She was twisting my concern for my own financial survival into an attack on her unborn child. It was a brilliant, cruel piece of emotional blackmail. And as always, Kevin, who had walked in during the confrontation, sided with her. "Mom, come on," he sighed, that familiar, weary sound. "Of course the money is for the baby. What else would we use it for?" I felt the walls closing in. I was a prisoner, and now I was also the prisoner's bank. They were consuming my home, my peace, and now my financial security, all while claiming it was for my own good, for the good of the family. The baby, a beautiful little boy they named Franklin after his grandfather, a tribute that felt more like an insult, a final claim on my husband's legacy, was born that spring. And my life became infinitely smaller. My quiet mornings were gone, replaced by the sounds of a crying baby. My peaceful evenings were gone, replaced by the endless cycle of feeding and changing. I loved my grandson, of course I did. But I had become an unpaid, unacknowledged, and invisible nanny in the background of their new, perfect family portrait. My opinions on child rearing were dismissed with a condescending smile. "Oh, Margaret, they don't do it that way anymore," Brenda would say when I suggested an old remedy for colic. "We follow the modern method." My role was to be quiet, to be helpful, and to stay out of the way. The final straw, the act of aggression so blatant and so cruel that it finally woke me from my long, slow surrender, happened on a Tuesday afternoon. It was about 6 months after Franklin was born. Brenda announced that her mother was coming to stay for a few weeks to help with the baby. "That's lovely," I said. "She can stay in the guest room." We had a small second guest room at the end of the hall. Brenda gave me a strange look, a look that was a mixture of pity and impatience. "No, Mom," she said, as if I were incredibly slow-witted. "The guest room is too small for her. And it's right next to the nursery. We can't have her being woken up all night. She'll be staying in your room." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "My room?" "Yes," she said, her tone bright and final. "It's the master suite. It's bigger, It has its own bathroom. It's the most sensible solution. You can stay in the small guest room while she's here. It'll be like a little vacation for you. A vacation in a cramped little room down the hall, while a guest, her mother, slept in my bed, in my room, surrounded by the last vestiges of my life. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking disrespect, left me speechless. No, I finally managed to say. The word felt small and weak. Brenda's smile vanished. Her eyes turned to steel. It wasn't a request, Margaret. It's what's happening. My mother needs to be comfortable. I will not have her stuck in a tiny room like some second-class citizen. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. She was worried about her mother being treated like a second-class citizen in my home, while she had been treating me like one for over 2 years. That evening, I went to Kevin. I thought, this has to be the line. He cannot possibly let this happen. I found him in the living room rocking the baby. Kevin, I said, my voice shaking with a desperate plea. Your wife wants to put me out of my own bedroom for her mother. He wouldn't look at me. He just kept rocking the baby, his eyes fixed on his son's face. Mom, it's just for a few weeks, he said, his voice low and flat. Brenda is under a lot of stress. Her mom is coming to help. Please, for the love of God, don't make a big deal out of this. Just do it for me. For the family. I'd make a big deal out of this. He was telling me that being evicted from my own bedroom was not a big deal. He was telling me that my dignity, my comfort, my place in my own home was less important than accommodating his wife's unreasonable demands. In that moment, looking at my son, the son I had adored, the son I had given everything to, I felt a piece of my heart turn to stone. The boy I had raised was gone. In his place was this weak, defeated man, a man who would sacrifice his own mother on the altar of his wife's happiness just to keep the peace. I knew then that I had lost him completely. The bond was broken. And with that realization, something inside me broke too. The part of me that was willing to be quiet, to be accommodating, to bend and bend until I was on the verge of snapping. It snapped. No, I said again. But this time, the word was not small or weak. It was cold. It was hard. I will not be kicked out of my room. This is my house. The change in my tone made him finally look up. He saw something in my face he hadn't seen before. Not sadness, not desperation, but a cold, unfamiliar fury. It startled him. Mom, he started, but I cut him off. I am done, Kevin. I am done being difficult. I am done being pushed into smaller and smaller corners of my own life. This is my home, Frank's home, and I will not be a guest in it. I turned and walked back to my bedroom, my back straight, and for the first time in a very long time, I locked the door. The retaliation was swift, and it was brutal. The next morning, I woke to the sound of banging on my door. It was Kevin. Mom, open the door. We need to talk about this. There is nothing to talk about, I called through the door. I heard Brenda's sharp voice in the background. For God's sake, Kevin, just get the key. I heard him fumbling with the old skeleton key that opened all the bedroom doors. The lock clicked. The door opened. They stood there, Kevin looking miserable and ashamed, Brenda looking triumphant and furious. Margaret, this is ridiculous, Brenda said. You're acting like a child. My mother arrives this afternoon. We need to get this room ready. Get out of my room, I said, my voice quiet but shaking with rage. Brenda laughed, a short, ugly sound. It's not your room anymore, is it? It's our house. Kevin is on the deed, remember? He has as much right to this room as you do. And he and I, as a family unit, have decided this room is needed for a guest. You're being outvoted. She then turned to my closet, flung the doors open, and began to pull my clothes from their hangers. Blouses, slacks, the dress I wore to my own wedding. She pulled them out indiscriminately and threw them into a pile on the floor. What are you doing? I shrieked, lunging forward, but Kevin stepped in my way, blocking me. He put his hands on my shoulders. Mom, stop. Just stop, he pleaded. You're going to get hurt. He wasn't protecting me from her. He was restraining me for her. I watched, frozen in horror, as this woman, this stranger, systematically emptied my closet. She stripped my life from the hangers and threw it on the floor. Then she started on the dresser, pulling out my underthings, my sweaters, my treasured, private belongings. "Brenda, stop!" I'd, tears of pure rage and humiliation streaming down my face. She ignored me. When she had created a massive pile on the floor, she turned to Kevin. "Take these to the guest room," she commanded. And my son, obeyed. He began to scoop up armfuls of my life, my dignity, and carry them out of the room, his head bowed in shame. But she wasn't done. She picked up my favorite armchair, the one I had managed to keep in my room, the matching one to Frank's. "This old thing has to go," she declared. With a strength I didn't know she possessed, she dragged it out of the room, down the hall, through the living room, and out the front door. I followed, numb with disbelief. She shoved it onto the curb. Then she came back in, grabbed a pile of the clothes Kevin hadn't moved yet, and threw them out the front door, onto the damp morning grass. My clothes, my life, strewn across the lawn for all the neighbors to see. And that's when I saw it. My son, standing in the doorway of what was now ID room, talking to his wife about picture placement, completely oblivious to his mother, standing on the front lawn, her life in a heap at her feet. Something inside me didn't just break in that moment. It died. The mother in me, the soft, forgiving, endlessly loving mother, died right there on the grass. And the woman who was left behind was someone I didn't recognize. She was a stranger, forged in the fires of the deepest betrayal a person can know. She was cold. She was clear-headed. And she was going to burn their world to the ground. I didn't scream. I didn't cry anymore. I calmly walked back into the house, past my son and his wife, who were now arguing about where to put their bed. I went to my new room, the small, cramped guest room, and I closed the door. I sat on the small bed, surrounded by the piles of my discarded clothes, and I felt a terrifying calm descend. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken me, that they had taken everything. And they had. They had taken my home, my son, my dignity, my peace. But in taking everything, they had left me with one thing: nothing to lose. A person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the world. I picked up the phone. I called my sister. "Helen," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I need the name of that lawyer you used for your divorce. The one you said was a real shark." The war of attrition was over. It was time for a war of annihilation. Sitting in that small guest room, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I felt a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The storm of confusion, grief, and humiliation was over. And in the dead calm of its aftermath, I could finally think. The Margaret who cried, the Margaret who pleaded, the Margaret who was afraid of making things difficult, she was a ghost. She had been evicted, not just from her bedroom, but from my very soul. The woman left in her place was a stranger, and she had only one purpose: to reclaim what was hers. The key, I knew, was the house itself. That single foolish act of love, adding Kevin's name to the deed, was the foundation of their power over me. They saw it as an unbreakable shield. Kevin was a co-owner. What he and his wife decided as the majority family unit in the house was law. That was Brenda's logic. But I had a sudden crystal-clear memory of my husband, Frank, a man of numbers and rules, explaining the concept of a partition action to a client on the phone years ago. It was a word I had filed away without understanding. Now, it was a lifeline. The lawyer my sister recommended was a woman named Ms. Eva Rostova. She was exactly as described, a shark in a tailored suit. I met her in her stark, modern office. I didn't cry or tell a long, rambling story of my pain. I had learned my lesson. Emotion was a weapon they used against me, painting me as hysterical. With Ms. Rostova, I was all business. I laid out the timeline, the move-in, the financial takeover, the slow colonization of my home, the eviction from my bedroom, the final, humiliating act of my belongings being thrown on the street. I was concise, factual, and cold. They believe that because his name is on the deed as a joint tenant, they have the right to do this, I concluded. They believe they have outvoted me in my own home. Ms. Rostova leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eyes. They are dangerously mistaken, she said, her voice a low purr. A joint tenancy gives co-owners an equal share of the property, Mrs. Gable. It does not give one owner the right to oust another from their home. What your daughter-in-law has done is called an ouster. It's an illegal eviction, and it gives you, the ousted party, grounds to sue for a partition by sale. There it was, the legal weapon I needed. A partition by sale, Ms. Rostova explained, is a lawsuit where a co-owner asks the court to force the sale of the property and divide the proceeds. Typically, it's a last resort. But in this case, it's our opening salvo. We will file a lawsuit demanding the house be sold. It will force them to the negotiating table. It will force your son to choose between his mother and his wife, not in a shouting match in the living room, but in a legal deposition. But I had a different endgame in mind. I don't just want to negotiate, Ms. Rostova, I said, my voice as cold as steel. I don't want to sell the house. This is my home. Frank built it for me. I want it back. All of it. She raised an eyebrow. You want to buy him out? It wasn't a question. I want to take his name off the deed, I clarified. I want to own my home, free and clear, as I did before. Is it possible? Everything is possible, Mrs. Gable. With the right leverage, she said with a thin smile. And their greed will be our leverage. They want money. They think this house is their golden goose. We will use that against them. Our strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. It was designed to exploit their weaknesses, Brenda's greed and Kevin's weakness. The first step was a formal, terrifying letter from Ms. Rostova's office. It was delivered by a process server to my own front door. Brenda answered, her face a mask of annoyance that quickly turned to shock as she was handed the legal documents. I watched from the hallway as she tore open the envelope. I saw her face drain of all color. She stormed into the living room where Kevin was playing with the baby. "Kevin, your mother is suing us," she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "She's trying to force us to sell the house. The crazy old woman is trying to make us homeless." That evening, the confrontation I had been waiting for arrived. Kevin knocked on my door. When I opened it, he looked broken. "Mom, what is this? A lawsuit? Why would you do this? We're your family. You stopped being my family the moment you stood by and watched your wife throw my life onto the front lawn," I said calmly. "This is no longer a family matter, Kevin. It is a legal one. Any further communication will have to go through my lawyer." I closed the door in his stunned face. The sound was incredibly satisfying. The lawsuit was the first blow. The second was financial. Ms. Rostova advised me to take immediate action to protect what little I had left. I went to the bank and opened a new account at a different branch. I had my pension and Social Security redirected there. I cut them off. The household slush fund was closed. The effect was immediate. 2 weeks later, I overheard a frantic, whispered argument from their room. "The mortgage payment is due, Kevin. The credit cards are maxed out. What are we going to do? You have to talk to her. You have to get her to drop this insane lawsuit and give us money." But I was a stone wall. I did not speak to them. I ate my meals in my room. I was a ghost in my own house, a ghost they could no longer control and could no longer afford. The panic in the house was a palpable thing. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer the weak, dependent one. I was the one with the power, the one with the lawyer, the one holding the future of the house in her hands. The third and final blow was the deposition. It was the moment Ms. Rostova had been waiting for. Kevin was legally required to sit in a conference room in her office and answer questions under oath. Brenda was there, sitting beside him, trying to project an aura of confidence, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her handbag. I was there too. I sat at the end of the table, silent, just watching. Ms. Rostova began with Kevin. She was not aggressive. Her tone was almost sympathetic. "Mr. Gable," she began, Could you tell me about your financial situation when you and your wife moved into your mother's home? Under oath, Kevin was forced to admit the truth. The job loss, the debt, the eviction. He had to admit that I had taken them in out of kindness. Then she moved on to the deed. When your mother added your name to the deed of her house, what was your understanding of that arrangement? That she trusted me, Kevin stammered. That she wanted me to have the house one day, that I would always take care of her. And would you say that allowing your wife to evict your mother from her own bedroom and throw her belongings on the lawn constitutes taking care of her? Ms. Rostova asked, her voice silky smooth. Kevin flushed a deep, painful red. It was a temporary situation. My mother-in-law was visiting. A temporary situation that you did nothing to stop, Ms. Rostova pressed. An act so cruel that any reasonable person would see it as a deliberate attempt to make your mother's life unbearable, to force her out of her own home. Wouldn't you agree? I don't know. Brenda tried to interrupt. He was under a lot of stress. We had a new baby. Ms. Rostova turned her cold gaze on Brenda. You will have your turn, Mrs. Gable. She turned back to Kevin. Let's talk about the money. Since moving in, have you or your wife contributed to the mortgage, to the property taxes, to the upkeep of this home? Well, no, but... So, for 3 years, you have lived rent-free in your mother's home, while systematically taking it over, and your only contribution has been to cause her profound emotional and psychological distress. Is that a fair summary? Kevin looked like he was going to be sick. He couldn't answer. He just stared at the table. Finally, Ms. Rostova leaned forward and delivered the killing blow, the offer that was actually a threat. Here is our position, Mr. Gable. We are prepared to go to court and argue that your mother should not only be awarded the full proceeds of the sale, but that she should also be compensated for the market rate rent you have failed to pay for 3 years, and for damages related to the illegal ouster. Given your documented financial difficulties, a judgment like that would bankrupt you for life. Brenda let out a small gasp. However, Ms. Rostova continued. My client is a kind woman. Despite everything, she does not wish to see her only son ruined. I almost choked on the irony, but I kept my face a perfect mask of stone. She is prepared to offer you a deal. You will sign a quitclaim deed, removing your name from the title of the house, effective immediately. In exchange, she will drop the lawsuit and will not pursue you for back rent or damages. You will have 30 days to vacate the property. This is a one-time offer. You can take it, or you can face us in court. The choice is yours. It was a checkmate, a beautiful, brutal checkmate. She had used their own greed and financial desperation as the bars of their cage. To fight for the house, they would have to risk a judgment that would destroy them. To walk away with nothing was their only safe option. I watched Kevin's face. I saw the war in his eyes. He looked at Brenda, whose face was a mask of pure, avaricious fury. She wanted to fight. She wanted the money, the house. Then he looked at me. And for the first time, I think he saw me not as his weak mother, but as a formidable opponent, a stranger who had him cornered. He saw the woman I had become. He looked down at the table, a broken man. We'll take the deal, he whispered. Victory doesn't always feel like a celebration. Sometimes, it just feels like the quiet, aching relief of a battle finally being over. Walking out of that lawyer's office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. I had won back my house, but in the process, I had utterly destroyed my son. I had looked my only child in the eye and treated him like a hostile stranger. I had used the law to break him, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it had been the right thing to do. That was the most painful part of all. The 30 days that followed were the strangest of my life. The house was thick, with a suffocating silence, punctuated by the sounds of boxes being taped up and bitter, whispered arguments from behind their closed door. They avoided me completely. I was a ghost in my own hallways again, but this time, I was the one who was haunting them. Brenda's fury was a toxic cloud in the air. I would catch her glaring at me with a look of pure, undiluted hatred. She saw me as the thief who had stolen her future, her dream house. She would never in a million years understand or acknowledge what she had done. In her mind, she was the victim. Kevin, on the other hand, was a shell. He moved through the house with the slow, defeated shuffle of a man who had lost everything. The shame coming off him was so potent, it was almost a physical smell. He had been so sure of his wife's strength, of her intelligence, and he had witnessed it all crumble into petty greed and lies under the harsh light of a legal deposition. He had traded his mother's love for a woman who, it was now painfully clear, had only ever loved what he could provide her. And now, he could provide nothing. I didn't speak a single word to him for that entire month. There was nothing to say. The damage was too profound. On the final day, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. I watched from the bay window Frank had built for me as they loaded their lives into the back of it. The modern furniture Brenda had bought, the expensive crib, the boxes of their clothes. It didn't take very long. They hadn't accumulated a life here. They had only occupied a space. The last person out of the house was Kevin. He stood in the driveway for a long moment, looking at the front door. Then he turned and looked up at the window where I was standing. Our eyes met. His face was a mess of regret and a sorrow so deep it seemed ancient. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of understanding, but of surrender. Then he got into the passenger seat of their car, beside his silent, furious wife, and they drove away. I walked through the empty house. It felt huge, cavernous. The walls were scarred where their pictures had been. Frank's office was an empty, pale gray box. It was mine again. All of it. But the victory was hollow. The silence that I had craved for so long now felt heavy. What happened to them? I heard through my sister that their marriage didn't survive the fallout. The financial pressure, combined with the spectacular failure of her plan, was too much. They separated less than 6 months later. Brenda moved back in with her mother. Kevin, I heard, was living in a small rented apartment across town, working a low-level job, trying to piece his life back together. He tried to call a few times. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready. The wound was too raw. The image of my clothes on the wet grass was seared into my memory. The first time we spoke was nearly a year later. It was on Frank's birthday. I was visiting his grave, and when I turned to leave, Kevin was standing there, by the gate, looking thin and older than his years. He was just waiting. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet. I just nodded, my heart a painful, tight knot in my chest. I know you'll probably never forgive me," he began, his eyes filling with tears. "And you shouldn't. There's no excuse for what I did, for what I let happen. I was a coward. I was weak. And I let her poison me against you. I let her convince me that her happiness was more important than your dignity." He finally looked at me, and what I saw was not the weak, defeated man from the house, but a glimmer of the son I had raised, the boy with the good heart who had gotten so terribly lost. "Every day," he whispered, "I wake up, and I think about you, in this house, alone. And I think about what I threw away. Not the house, not the money, but you, my mother. And I don't know how to live with it. What do you do with a confession like that? What do you do with a pain that big?" Part of me, the cold, hard woman who had won the lawsuit, wanted to turn and walk away, to let him live with it. But then I looked at his face, and I saw Frank. I saw the little boy with scraped knees. And I knew that hate, in the end, is a prison for the person who holds it. I had fought for my home. I wasn't going to let bitterness be my final cellmate. "The first step to living with it, Kevin," I said, my voice thick with tears. I hadn't let myself cry for over a year, "is to forgive yourself. The rest will take time. A long time. It's been a long time. Our relationship is not repaired. It is under construction. It is a slow, painstaking process. He comes over sometimes. He doesn't come inside. He works in the garden, just as his father used to. He weeds the flower beds. He mows the lawn. He fixes the porch steps. He doesn't ask for anything. He just serves his penance in silence in the yard of the home he tried to take. And I watch him from the window, and I feel something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a possibility. A flicker of hope in the ruins. And what is the lesson in all of this? I learned that a mother's love, while boundless, should not be unconditional. It should not require you to set yourself on fire to keep your children warm. You are a person first. Your peace, your dignity, your home, they are not assets to be handed over. They are your life. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a child who has lost their way is to let them face the full, brutal consequences of their own choices. It is a terrible, painful kind of love, but it is the only kind that can sometimes lead them back to themselves. And I learned that you must never, ever be afraid to fight for your own home, especially from the people you let inside it. If you are listening to this and you feel yourself shrinking in your own home, please hear me. Your comfort matters. Your belongings matter. Your bedroom door matters. You are not being difficult for wanting to protect your space. You are not being sentimental for cherishing your memories. You are not being crazy for feeling like you are being invaded. Do not allow anyone, not even your own blood, to make you a guest in your own life. Your home is your fortress. Defend it. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. It was not an easy one to tell, but your silent company has been a great comfort. If my journey has touched you in any way, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so we can share more stories together. And in the comments, if you feel moved to do so, please share how you found strength when you needed it most. Your stories give strength to us all. Love you all. This is Grandma Margaret, and I'll see you in the next story.